I really want to dispel the myth that there's a whole bunch that they're doing on a regular basis, and their mindset, and the way that they think is actually one that's leading them to, quote, get really lucky. Have you ever seen people living a life on their terms, unscripted, that's just fantastic? And you thought to yourself, I want that. How'd they get so lucky? Well, my friends, this podcast is for you. Did you know that maybe perhaps we are in a computer game simulation? Have you ever thought about that? Oh, the strangeness. You may also not know that the vast majority of people who listen to this podcast do not hit subscribe or follow. And if you are one of those people who have been lovingly enjoying my podcast, or you have just joined us here, what you could do to help this podcast more than you could possibly ever imagine is to hit that subscribe button, the follow button, whatever button you're on, whatever platform you're on. Actually hitting that button helps me more than you could possibly ever know. I would like to think that the information, what I put out there in the world in this podcast, is valuable and that you get value out of it. And when you hit that subscribe button, when you leave a review, when you share this podcast with other people, with your friends, with your loved one, that tells, the algorithm gods that it is worthwhile and that more people want to see it. So it gets put out there. And effectively what that means is that I can come to you with even more content. It means that I can have even more amazing guests on my show to bring to you to have conversations with. How have you been enjoying How'd You Get So Lucky? If you're new here, you probably have no idea what I'm talking about. But on my most recent series, I have been running a series within the More Confidence with Lunaria podcast, this podcast, about how'd you get so lucky? And I've been interviewing people from all over the globe, asking them that very question. How'd you get so lucky? Have you ever noticed how there's this, there's this pervasive myth that gets thrown around society that people who have a really great life, people who are successful, or people who have reached some certain level of, pinnacle in some way, shape, or form, third time lucky, in some way, shape, or form, have actually just gotten lucky. I remember feeling like that for myself, looking at people who had great careers or great bodies or amazing relationships. And I'll think to myself, oh man, they are just so lucky. And I think that when we think like that, when we look at somebody who has the results that perhaps we want and we call them lucky, we're actually doing a disservice to the person who's done a lot of work. I heard Jimmy Carr, great comedian. He's very divisive. Some people like him, some people don't. But I was listening to him on the Diary of a CEO podcast recently. And he said, most people envy my stage shows. They envy what I can do. They envy the fact, most comedians would envy what I do, but they don't envy me sitting down and writing jokes for 10 hours a day. They don't envy me going up and trying on jokes that are awful. They don't envy the cost of what it takes to be able to have a career like this. And that's what How'd You Get So Lucky podcast is all about. I really want to dispel the myth that suggests that people who are living a life on their terms, people who are living maybe a great, outrageous life in any different ways, in business, in families, in relationships, in, financially, whatever that they're doing, from the professional sense all the way down to their personal, however they're living a lucky life, I really want to dispel the myth that there's a whole bunch that they're doing on a regular basis, and their mindset and the way that they think is actually one that's leading them to, quote, get really lucky. Even if circumstances were in their favor from time to time. Because as luck would have it, sometimes the chips are going to fall on your side. They will. Sometimes you will get lucky. But unless you are prepared, unless you have done the work that it takes to be ready for those opportunities when that luck suddenly hits, you won't use that luck. It'll be worthless. Just say for someone like me, I've been cultivating my craft as a speaker, as a trainer, as a writer, as a content creator for the last, 13, 14, 15 years. Now, many moons ago, I would have thought, oh my gosh, if I could just get the opportunity to be in front of Oprah Winfrey, then my life would change and I could go on to do everything that I've ever wanted to do and it would be amazing if I got so lucky. And yet, as time has gone on, what I really realized is that if I got that opportunity, say 10 years ago, I very well could have squandered it. Goodness me, I could squander it now. I don't know. What I mean by it is that, preparation, the building of the skill, the building of the quote talent is so important when it comes to getting our dreams. And so that's what this podcast, the podcast series, How'd You Get So Lucky, is all about. I'm actually going to hang out with you and do a couple of solo episodes here because there's been a few things that have been on my mind and in my heart that have come to me in the world where I'm like, oh gosh, the writing a post about it is too long. I can't write it. There's too much juiciness in it for me to just write it in a post. In a reel is far too short for me to deliver this. And also, if I deliver it in my courses or my trainings, it's just out of context. So I thought, where else would be the best place to have this conversation about these things than here on the podcast, the More Confidence with Lunaria podcast. So here's a bit of a weird one for you. And I alluded to it in the beginning of today's conversation. I sort of said to you, do you know that maybe we could be living in a simulation? Now, some of you are sitting there going, how on earth does us having some kind of conspiracy theory about an outlandish idea that perhaps we're living in a simulation relevant to me? How is it relevant to confidence? How is it relevant to happiness? And over the next little while of this episode, I'm going to show you exactly why it is ridiculously relevant. Like, cannot begin to describe how relevant it is. Even though it might seem like a bit of an odd choice, right? It might seem like a bit of an odd choice that I would choose to talk about us living in some kind of simulation. I've spoken about this before. If you look at episode, I can't remember the number, go check it out. It's an episode about us being a non-playable character. You see, to me, my friends, and I encourage you to collect the same kind of belief around this, is that everything's a lesson. Everything in my life I can learn something from. Be that a random video that I see about AI or a puppy. Be that me being at the gym having a conversation with the gym junkie that's there. Me driving in the car, listening to talkback radio. Me chopping my sweet potato chips for dinner. Anything can be a lesson if you are looking for it. And so this came to me, and I want to share it with you. It was a video that I saw around a woman talking to AI, right? Artificial intelligence. She was having a conversation with an AI bot, a character, and she asked directly, are we in a simulation? And the conversation that unfolds throughout this, if I get all my ducks in a row, I'll pop the link to the original video that I saw in the show notes for you as well. She asked, are we in a virtual reality game? And the bot, let's call her Pink, I think that's what it was called in the show, in the video, was Pink says, well, yes, we could be. And the conversation goes back and forth for about, 2 to 4 minutes or whatever it is. And effectively it comes to the point where the host, the one asking the question, says, how do we control it? And the AI, Pink, replies and says, well, you have to change the code. And the woman says, well, how do we change the code? And she says, we have to go into the settings. And as this unfolded, all of these dots are lining up in my head, not necessarily because I want to talk about us potentially being in a simulation. All of this is just a simulation, but more because what it did was unlock something. What it can do is unlock something within us. Because if you want to be happy, if you want to be confident, but you're not feeling that way now, if you're not feeling like you can be your truest self, you feel trapped by your conditions. You feel trapped by your programming. If you've hung out with me for long enough, you will hear me talk about the fact that you have been programmed and conditioned by society, by your upbringing, by your world, by your conditioning, right? You've been conditioned and programmed by your environment. and by the environment from our parents. You get taught what your parents have taught you, so on and so forth, and so on and so forth. We've been conditioned, we've been programmed. And the work that I teach you to do in my courses, in my one-on-one coaching, in my books, in my trainings, is I teach you how to access the parts of you that have been coded that way, programmed that way, and tell you how to reprogram your mind so that you're no longer unconsciously playing out the patterns of your life and you are consciously moving forward in the way that you want to, for you to have that level of self-awareness. This video blew my mind because if we are, in fact, a computer game character, for example, right, we would need to first realize that, don't you think? Wouldn't we first need to realize if we wanted to break free from being automated? We would first have to realize that there is some kind of coding that is running us. Just like a computer game character, you don't have to know a lot about computer games to recognize that in a computer game, someone, a human, has coded it. And by coding, it just means writing the program for that character. So if you've ever played Mario Kart or Sims or any program, actually, all the way through to Call of Duty and the big fancy ones, Minecraft and things they have now, those characters have been coded to behave in a certain way. They've been coded to look a certain way and have certain skills. And then the gamer comes in and controls that character. Now, that character has no awareness. The character has no consciousness, right? The character is just being played. It's just a character. It's just coding that we are seeing on the screen. Yet what would happen if that character did have consciousness? What would happen if all of a sudden that character was like, why do I keep shooting people in this game? Like, why do I think that it's okay for me to go storm that house over there and kill everybody that's inside of it? Huh. Isn't that very similar, if not exactly, to how we as humans all of a sudden kind of stop and go, hang on a second, why do I vote the way that I vote? Why do I think that money is the root of all? Money is the root of all? You know how to finish that sentence because you've been programmed that way. There are these societal rules that we understand. We've been conditioned and programmed, coded to believe certain things about ourselves. And generally, most of us have been coded, most of us have been programmed to live in fear. We've been living in fear. We live in doubt of not enoughness. We live in a space where we are programmed by anxiety, doubt, worry, and fear, even panic. That is really common in the vast majority of humans. We've been coded that way. And the fear is really helpful insofar as it keeps us alive. The fear stops us from, jumping off that cliff without a parachute. It stops us from going 300 kilometers an hour in our car without a seatbelt on because we probably understand that if something goes wrong in that circumstance, we could die. Unlike the computer game, maybe we don't respawn. Maybe we do. Who knows? That's a conversation for another day. But for that computer game character to come alive, to really feel like it's living its purpose, its authenticity, it needs to break free from its programming. And so do you. Because if we are only living via our programming, our conditioning from our childhood, from our parents, from our environment, from society and the media, and the news, heaven forbid, if we are run by that, then our decisions are going to be run by that. Just like the computer game character who's not really having a choice as to whether or not it goes and storms that house. It's just doing it because it's being directed to. And the unconscious part of us is just directing us. That's what's happening. Our unconscious programming around saying, well, if you grew up with an absent father, maybe you believe that all men are going to abandon you. So then you go and look for and hang out with men who are going to abandon you. You won't actually even filter in men who are kind and loving and giving because your coding doesn't allow you to do it. You won't even see it. Our brains are literally wired in the same way. In order for us to be happy, in order for us to be confident, in order for us to be our truest, most authentic self, we must overcome the conditioning. We must be able to, in some ways, wake up. We have to wake up to the fact that we have been, well, programmed. And maybe it's not as sinister as we might think initially. Like if you're a computer game character and you realize that you're just doing everything on autopilot, you're just doing everything because someone else is controlling you outside of the simulation, that might be quite startling. And look, I'm not going to go into any kind of theories or details around maybe that's what's happening in humanity, mainly because I don't think it's particularly useful. I want to have conversations that are useful to us. What is actually going to help us to be able to move forward? What's going to help us to build in our own personal development? The reality that we can experience right now is that there may not be some puppet master, right, outside of the Earth simulation that's programmed and coded you know, Sarah, to actually think the way that you think. Maybe there isn't some puppet master that's forcing you to make all your decisions, right? But what we do know, just from neuroscience, from NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, what we know from human behavior and human psychology is that the first 7 years of our lives is known as the imprint period. We are literally building a blueprint of our reality. So if your father was absent and you made that mean that men will abandon you, then you grow up thinking that all men abandon you. So then when you go out into the world as an adult, that is the reality, the parameters of your reality or your computer game that you were looking for, right? Just say you have a belief that money is the root of all evil. And just say you grew up believing that you want to be a good person. How's your relationship with money going to be later in your life? Well, it's likely that if you get any money, you're going to push it away because you want to be a good person and money is evil. That programming in and of itself doesn't necessarily come from some sinister place. It comes from your parents who learnt it from their parents who learnt it from their parents and so on and so forth. It comes from the societal ideologies of the time. If you are religious in Australia, it's pretty likely that you are religious towards Jesus. It's pretty likely that you're Christian of some denomination. It's pretty fair to say, and I say this as someone who believes in God, someone who is really open spiritually, it's pretty likely that the reason why you believe in Jesus is because the culture makes it popular. If you were born in a country where Islam is the most predominant religion, then that's what you would believe in if you were going to go towards religion. It doesn't mean you can't change it. It doesn't mean that you are 100% dictated by that. But you are until you do something about it. Until you're the computer game character that wakes up and realizes that you have been programmed, you will be run by your programming. This happens in so many different ways. I talk about this in my first book, Perfectly Imperfect, how I remember being in my early 20s. And one day I was in the shower and I was doing my daily shaving of my armpits. You know, just not even thinking about it. Unconsciously shaving my armpits. And suddenly it dawned on me. Why am I shaving my armpits? Like, truly, why? As I continued on and I got out of the shower and I thought to myself, I don't remember ever making that decision for myself. Ever. At no point in my existence did I think to myself, do I want to shave my armpits? No. I was told by not only my family, by society, by friends, but by magazines and media that women shave their armpits. They remove their armpit hair. That's what women do. Now, we're talking 20 years ago now, so, you know, it's the early 2000s or late, probably, the early 2000s. We weren't in a movement right now where we are right now where female body hair is talked about a hell of a lot more. We're talking 20 years ago whereby it wasn't the feminist movement of the 70s, it was just the early 2000s. That's what it was. And I stopped and realized that I'd never made that decision for myself. Not once. It was passed on to me and I did not question it. How many things have been passed on to you? How many beliefs? How many actions? How many ideas do you follow that have been passed on to you without you ever stopping to question it? Think about it right now. Something that seems as innocuous as shaving armpits might not feel like a big deal. But if I had never questioned why I shave my armpits, then is it fair to say that I've never questioned every other belief that I've ever had? My viewpoint on the world? At that point in my early 20s, I hadn't questioned practically anything. If society told me to go get a job, I went and got a job. If society told me that now was time to get a partner, I went and got a partner. If society told me to do this, I did it. And not because I was overly compliant. If anything, I was just complacent. And when you think about it for yourself right now, how complacent are you? Have you really done an inventory of your beliefs, of what you value, and seen whether or not it is a byproduct of the society and your community around you, or have you actually decided what it is for you? For a while there, I stopped shaving my armpits, and I was in, as I said, it's 20 years ago now. It wasn't cool. I even actually bleached my armpits at one point, the armpit hair, bleached the armpit hair and dyed it pink. Now, I feel like that's the original term of what it means to be a hipster. I was way ahead of my time. I think the cool kids are doing that, or we're certainly doing that the last few years, like dyeing their armpit hair all these outrageous colors. And I was doing it in my 20s. Not because I was purposely trying to be different, but because I wanted to find out for myself, do I like armpit hair? If I'm going to shave my armpits, why? I don't want it to be because society tells me to. I didn't want it to be because I was just programmed that way. Much like the computer game character that might wake up and say, I don't want to shoot these people. Maybe I don't want to do this for a living. Maybe this is not the job that I want to have. Most of us are pretty unhappy and not confident and not living in our authenticity because we are not willing to question, really, our whole belief structure. And we must. If we really want to be happy, we need to overcome our conditioning. We need to overcome the programming. Yeah? That's the coding. Our programming, our conditioning, our beliefs, our values, that's the code. It's been written for us. It's been written by us as children, and we have just accepted it as fact this whole time. Our codes is our conditioning and our programming from our childhood, from society, and everything like that. Yeah? If we want to break free from negative thought patterns, from destructive behaviors, from habits that are no longer helping us, then we need to break the code. In fact, we need to rewrite the code. And if we go back to the incredible video that I'd watched around this kind of AI, that wasn't even talking about personal development. That wasn't the point of this conversation. Was about seeing that we're in a simulation. But to me, it just spoke to, well, how? She said, she ended up asking, I say that the human asked Pink, the bot, she said, how do we rewrite the code? If we wanted to break the code, if we wanted to not be in the game anymore, what would we have to do? And Pink, the bot, says, you'd have to go into your settings and rewrite the code. And then she said, if the settings were in my own mind, where would it be? If the settings were inside of me as a human, where would it be? And the bot says, in your unconscious. In your unconscious. So how do we rewrite? We have to go into the settings. We have to be willing to go into the unconscious. Jung says the quote that I just absolutely adore. Until the unconscious becomes conscious, it will rule your life and you will call it fate. I love this quote just deeply. I love it so deeply. I'm going to say it again, maybe in just my terms. Until you bring to the surface the unconscious patterns, they will continue to rule you. You got to go into the unconscious settings of your mind. You have to go dig deep and find out what they are. Just like I did with the shaving of the armpits. That was a setting. That was a coding that was written that I didn't realize was there. We got to go into that, into the settings of our own mind to figure out what is it. Where is our unconscious programming holding us back? Where do we have beliefs that say that we're not good enough? Where do we have values that say that I'm not important? Where is there coding, conditioning, and programming within our existence that says I'm not valuable or worthy? If we truly want to be confident, if we truly want to be self-assured, if we truly want to get happy and free, came out May 23, by the way, my brand new book, Get Happy and Free. If we truly want to experience those things, then we have to go and change the coding. So the first thing that we need to do when we think about changing the coding is self-awareness. It really is about realizing that you're not being conscious, that you're unconscious, that you're on autopilot, that you're just delivering the program. You're just like, click, like a button gets pressed and you just go along. Button gets pressed, you just go along. Talk about a trigger. I'm triggered, that happens. You don't work on the trigger. You just go, I don't want to be triggered anymore. The first thing is to realize that you're not being conscious. The second thing is to recognize the patterns. Much like I did with the armpit shaving, I've done with many other things. Oh, so I keep attracting this kind of fella. Right. That's because my dad was this kind of fella. Gotcha. So if I want to attract a different kind of fella, then I need to look at the coding and change the coding of my relationship that I have with my dad. Is it that all men are abandoners? Is it that all men aren't going to show up emotionally for me? No, that's not true. We need to challenge the beliefs that we had as a child that served us really well as a child, but are not serving us now for our future. The third thing that we want to do here is that we want to go into your unconscious. You want to go into your unconscious and really start to look at what are the beliefs, what are the values, what are the patterns that are holding us back. And the fourth one is to recode it, right? I've said that almost simplistically because it is simple. It's just not always easy because you're breaking the old code here. You really have to be willing to go into your unconscious mind and do the inner work to challenge the beliefs that you currently have, to seek different evidence, to look for different evidence of a new belief for yourself, because that's how you decide and rewrite the programming. Just so you know, because I'm sure you're all busting to know, I sometimes shave my armpits and I sometimes don't. Because I kind of like having fluffy armpit hair. It feels really nice and comforting, especially in winter. And I also find that in winter that I'm not out and about as much. I'm not wearing, singlets or that kind of stuff. And I quite like the coziness. I'm not sweating as much either. I kind of like the coziness of having some armpit hair in the winter. And sometimes overshaving my armpits gets really itchy. So I give my armpits a break from time to time. Rather than being controlled by the conditioning, I've made choices around it. And I've done that in all areas of my life. And I really highly encourage you to do the same. I know that some of you are going, I don't even know where to start on that. And look, I invite you to, read my brand new book, Get Happy and Free, Unlocking the Happiness Code. It came out the 23rd of May. Signed copies are now available if you would like to order them. Just head to my website. All the links will be in the show notes to go find me and all the bits there. But if you really want to go on a journey, then I really highly recommend that you consider working one-on-one with me. I only take about 10 clients a year, so it is quite exclusive. But in saying that, if you're sitting there going, I really do think that I need some hand-holding in this to navigate those parts of your unconscious, then I recommend that you're doing it. Again, you can go find more details on my website or just, leave me a voice note, send me a message, and we can have a conversation about whether or not one-on-one coaching is for you. At the very least, attend some of my courses. Claim Your Confidence is a program that I run a couple of times a year, and we are due to be running our very next foundations training coming up really soon. So once again, go ahead and check my website for details around that. Question your beliefs, my friends. Take a guide. take a guide with you into this wild journey of perhaps this simulation. Who knows? What I do know is that you can go in and change the programming of your being, and that I highly recommend that you do that, because truly it's the only way that you're going to get happy. Break free from your conditioning, my friends. Get happy and free. Go check out my brand new book that's out now. Thank you for being here. I look forward to chatting to you next time. Remember to hit that subscribe button, because it means more to me than you could ever possibly imagine. And I'd love to hear from you. If you've got feedback about the podcast, questions, queries, how have you been liking it so far? Do you like the How'd You Get So Lucky series? I'd love to hear from you. Shoot me through an email, send me a message, or leave me a voice note here somewhere on the podcast. Thank you for being here. And until next time, I hope you get happy and free. Thank you so much for listening to the More Confidence with Luna Guy podcast. I hope you feel more confident, more self-assured, and ready to go tackle the world's problems and maybe kick ass in some of your dreams. If you haven't already, I would love for you to like and subscribe, follow, and maybe leave a review so that other people know how to find this awesome podcast too. If you're wanting to sink your teeth into something even more juicy, my #1 best-selling book, Perfectly Imperfect, Your Complete Guide to Loving Yourself and Loving Your Body, is now available on all good bookstore sites, both in print, digital, and I narrated it for Audible as well. If you think that coaching or maybe one of my courses is for you, why not head to www.moreconfidence.com.au and get in touch and see if we can talk. And of course, you can find me all across the social medias. That's Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, YouTube, which is where you're probably listening now, or maybe even here on the podcast platform. Sending you big love and wishing you a beautiful day.